Every problem the Vikings had all season long all came home to roost at once, and it turned out to be the end of them. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today, it's a funeral. It's a eulogy. The Vikings season ends with quite a whimper after 14 bangs. Just two absolute disasters. And that's how quickly it can end. I want to approach this show a little bit differently than I would usually do like a game recap, because I'm going to be honest, I don't really think you guys want to hear about like Jared Verse beat Cam Robinson and blah, blah, blah. It's all a moot point with a lot of players that aren't going to be on the team next year. So instead, I would like to look at this a little bit more broadly and how what happened to the Vikings in this game was a microcosm of everything that has happened to them all year long. The Rams outplayed the heck out of the Vikings, and the Lions outplayed the heck out of the Vikings last week. There was a point made on the broadcast that Joe Buck and Troy Aikman were kind of saying, well, you know, they won 14 games, but look how little that matters, right? Like that doesn't do anything. You got to win in the playoffs, right? Which is true. But I think if that were the case, then don't watch the regular season. But we do. We show up every week and we watch the regular season. I'm getting DMs from people saying, I'm done for somebody said, I've been a Vikings fan for 40 years, but I think I'm done after this year. No, you aren't. I'll see you Sunday. I'll see you for free agency day for sure. By the time it's March, you've had two months of distance. You'll be back. Some of you are going to be back already. By the way, if you were curious, if you're new to Locked On Vikings goes on throughout the entire offseason, as does the Minnesota Football Party. Basically, everything I do will go on throughout the entire offseason. This is a year-round operation here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So I hope that you will come chill out. But the point I guess I'm making is the regular season is still, at the very least, an instructive thing that tells us stuff about the team and helps the team make decisions about what to move forward with. But I also just want to push back on the idea that anyone wasted their time this year. This year ruled. It was a lot of fun. And ultimately, that is the point of sports. You do not get into Vikings fandom because you're sitting there making a big bet that they're going to win you Super Bowls. You didn't make that decision. You didn't sit down and go, which team's going to win me a lot of Super Bowls? I'll be a Vikings fan. That didn't happen. It's not what anybody does. You fell in love. Whether you grew up falling in love or you got into football right around the time that Brett Favre and the Vikings were doing their 2009 thing, you fell in love then, or maybe earlier, or maybe, just a couple years ago. You fell in love. It was not a rational thing. And when the Vikings lose in the playoffs and their season ends and your gut gets punched, doesn't mean you were an idiot for getting into it. I really want to push back on that. Your instinct might be, well, gosh, next time I won't get my hopes up, then I won't feel as bad. And I got two things for you. One, yes, you will. Okay, I've tried it. We've all tried it. Doesn't work. Doesn't help. Two, then I think you're taking the point out of it. You know what I mean? The point of all of this is to get your hopes up and to have fun. I spent a month idly daydreaming about what if Sam Darnold won the Vikings a Super Bowl. Wouldn't it kind of feel right that it was going to be like a journeyman that like wasn't supposed to be good and he would be the guy? Like comparing to all of Vikings history, like it had to be that. It would be so perfect. And I got to daydream about that for a month. And you know what? That was awesome. I'm glad I did it. And the sting of it falling away is going to fade. But it was worth it. That's just where I'm at. Maybe you're more jaded than me and you don't enjoy football anymore, in which case maybe it's time for a new hobby. I think you should look in the mirror and really ask yourself that. But all that is to say, that was the first thing I wanted to start with. The regular season It doesn't get you anywhere to win 14 games if you still got to go on the road and play on Wild Card Weekend. And the Vikings had very much a direct chance to not do that, and they blew it. And then they very much had a direct chance to get into the divisional, go play in Philly. They did not do it. Team failed. They didn't fail quite as spectacularly as they did last year, but they also don't have the same excuses as they did last year. And now, at 3 years into the Kevin O'Connell tenure, he is garnering a reputation as a regular season maven that can't win in the playoffs. There's only one way to fix that, and he'll have to wait till next year to get another chance to. But when I say all the things came home to roost, how often this whole year have I sat here in front of this mic, in front of this little webcam, and said, boy, everything the Vikings do takes too long. Their passing plays take too long. Sam Darnold holds the ball too long. Their blitzes take too long. Their stunts take too long. Their coverages take too long to set up. Everything is too slow. And the Rams do everything fast. That, when we did the crossover with Doug McCain earlier last week, we kind of started talking about this in a different context of like conservative versus aggressive and how it's like these two kind of opposites meeting. And I think it turned into, by the Rams' design, and the Vikings were helpless to stop it, it turned into slow versus fast. Tortoise versus the hare. And the hare won. Stafford got the ball out in 2.5 seconds every time. And if your pass rush takes more than 2.5 seconds to even engage with the blocker, let alone beat the blocker, but just to get to him, you're not going to get there. And it's not like the Rams were throwing short passes all day long. They were throwing 25-yard passes right at the top of their drop. That is NFL-level Sunday execution. The Vikings offense took 4 to 5 seconds. You had former quarterbacks logging onto Twitter and saying, you have 2.5 seconds. It was Tommy Kramer tweeted that during the game. You have 2.5 seconds. And that is the rule of thumb. It's been the rule of thumb for decades. It's the rule of thumb when you talk about like analytics. It's the rule of thumb for how next-gen stats decides whether or not to log a pressure on the offensive lineman or on the quarterback has 2.5 seconds elapsed. That's the rule of thumb. So when 2 of the 9 sacks, the 9 sacks that Sam Darnold took happened after 2.5 seconds, that's a structural issue. That's either your quarterback just is holding the ball too long and has to stop doing that. And the fact that you were incapable of getting him away from that is a coaching failure, not to undo the quarterbacking failure that it is, but at a certain point, coach, you got to fix it. It's either that, or he has to hold the ball too long because your scheme takes too long. Time has to be the focus of the offseason. Time. And guess what? Drawing it up shorter, going to different pages of your playbook is free. In any McVay Shanahan style playbook, it is divided typically. It's divided by like day of install, but within that day of install, it will be the passing plays will be categorized by drop depth. Your 3-step drops, your 3 steps with a hitch, your 5-step drop, your 5 steps with a hitch, your 7 steps. 5 different categories. And all of those different plays have different timings that are meant to align with the length of that drop back. So if O'Connell wanted to call more stuff quicker all year long, he had it. It's in there. But what I think happened is mistakes made in August, or I'll say decisions made in August, proved costly in January. Those decisions are, we're going to spend more of our training camp time on the longer developing plays because we want a high average depth of target. We want to push the ball deep. We want to take big shots, and we want to get chunks and explosives. And I bet there's an analytics backbone to that really proves, the deeper passes do better. That's a pretty well-known statistical thing, right? You want to be aggressive. You want to go down, push the ball down the field, of course. And I think they spent so much time on that all year long that their 3-step playbook was too thin and they didn't have stuff that they liked from there. Or maybe it's just that Sam Darnold can't do that. He can't just get the ball out quick with regularity. He'll hold it too long. He'll turn down easy reads. He can't make those fast timing reads. And if that's the case, then so long and thanks for all the fish. There it is. That might be where we're at with Darnold, who had a terrible game. I wanted to start with the play calling thing. And And I think the same idea made its ugly face known on the defensive side. With Flores and the blitzes, and I'm starting to grow issues with the Flores defense as good. I mean, it was a very good defense all year long. Statistically, it was one of the best defenses in the league. It didn't feel like it because it kind of does give up explosives, but then get major plays in the end. But then if you have a game where you don't get a big turnover, where you don't get the big sack, the Vikings go without a takeaway for the first time all year, then, it doesn't look that good. And yeah, they kind of they gave up most of their scoring, or they gave up 24 in the first half and then only 3 in the second half. But the game was over. So the Rams cut the engines and called very conservative plays. And of course they didn't score. Too little, too late. The offense had a worse day than the defense for sure, but I still have structural issues with the defense that I want to talk about, as well as kind of where the franchise is at now. We've got to take stock of how this offseason is going to look. And I want to kind of prime you for that. We'll have all kinds of time to talk about the details of what Sam Darnold's contract might be or whatever, but we should probably lay the table of contents, right? So we'll do all that next. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. But now doing your taxes means matching with a TurboTax expert who can do all of it as soon as today for you entirely, and you don't have to worry about it. An expert who will give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress, so you can focus on your day while still being up to date on what's going on. That expert will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. That is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Hey, when you're done here, I would love it if you checked out patreon.com/LukeBrunnNFL. Everything from the whole season will be free by the time you listen to this. All of it is free to watch. So go check it out. Whatever topics you were curious about through the season. I got a ton of videos on Dallas Turner. I've got a ton on Sam Darnold. I've got a couple on Jordan Addison. We've got one on TJ Hawkinson, stuff on the O-line. Whatever you think, go check it out. Let me move on. I've got a point to make about the defense, and it's a pickier point than the stuff about the offense, which I think fundamentally fell apart. The Kevin O'Connell offense melted down and fell apart in the last 2 weeks. And whether that's because Sam Darnold just failed to do what he had been doing all year, or because there was a very key issue that Jared Goff and Matt Stafford are both the kinds of quarterbacks that exploit, is possibly a moot point, and then later we'll talk a little bit about what happens from here on out with Sam Darnold. But the defense's issue is twofold. One is the thing I've been kind of complaining about, which is the stunts take too long. They just take too long. There needs to be some respect for the idea that your players can just go out there and win. I think the Vikings were talented enough for that, and I think a little bit the schemy boys got a little bit too schemy boy. I think you could just give Jonathan Grenard a chance to go beat somebody and rush 4, cause the coverage to give him some time, right? But when the Vikings rush 5, this is the key to the Flores defense that you need to understand, that puts you in the world of this. Rushing 5 isn't an aggressive decision by Brian Flores' scheme. It's their base. It's just how they do things. It's not... It counts as a blitz by all the charting, but it's not like, okay, here's our pressure package, we're rushing 5. That's their normal pass rush. And covering with 6 is their normal coverage. That puts so much more on the pass rush. The pass rush has to get there. It has to cause problems. Like I said before the game, you have to make Matt Stafford feel it so that he can't just cleanly get the ball out. And the Vikings utterly failed to do that for the second time against Stafford, and Stafford carved him up. That's what he can do if you don't do that. And by the way, my preview was fantastic. I'm tooting my own horn, okay? Everything I said was going to happen would happen. And the only thing that didn't happen was the stuff I said about rollouts and taking advantage of the way that their backside edges play, because the Vikings didn't call those plays. And that just now kind of transposes into, that's my critique of them. I had an idea I thought would work, and yours sure as heck didn't. So, yeah, maybe. But one of the things that I said was, if Stafford can feel the pressure, the ball can start to come out wrong on him. And you saw a few of those misses, but not enough. And the problem is 6-man coverages just aren't that hard to beat. That's the fundamental issue. And I don't know what the solve is for that. To Flores' credit, I didn't know what the solve was last year when the defense kind of lost its way. And he found a bunch of great solves, really interesting ideas that I had a lot of fun studying and figuring out. So back in the lab he goes, whether it's here or if he takes a head coaching job, then he goes back in the lab to reinvent for whatever his new team is. But the problem is 6-man coverages are too easy to beat. And that's been the problem with blitzing 5 all day long. That's why teams can't blitz at volume, because 6-man coverages, unless you have really good man cover guys and you just play cover 1 and man up and beat everybody, right? If you just line up and win your reps, then you get to blitz all day. But if you can't, you either got to play fire zone, which is 3 deep, 3 under. That's really easy to beat. There's a lot of space when you only got 3 guys taking the whole deep part of the field. There's a lot of big giant seams. There's holes in that. Or the palm stuff that they do, split field, that's just too easy to beat. You can't divide the whole field into 6 zones and expect there not to be space. Good quarterbacks are going to find it. And the concern that I have for this build of the Vikings long term is both of these problems manifest more against the kinds of teams you're going to see in the playoffs. And that might feel like a truism. Like, yeah, your team does worse against good teams because good teams are good and they're going to make it harder. Like, of course. But I think it gets to an unwinnable spot. I think if you played 10 games against the Rams, for what we've seen, the Vikings versus the Rams twice this year, you play 10 games against the Rams, you lose 9 of them. Maybe you get lucky once. I mean, the team was better than you. And I think the lines were the same. Vikings weren't going to go into Detroit and beat them. Not if they didn't have a counterpunch. So that lack of flexibility is what I think the clear and clean coaching error was. The individual performances in this game that were, losses. Shaq Griffin losing a rep to Cooper Kupp, and, what happened with Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel on the interior, Dalton Reisner, total disaster class. I think those guys a lot of people played their way out of Minnesota in this game, I think, which is unfortunate, but I think it's true. But I think the grander structural issue is you can't go into the playoffs and beat the kinds of quarterbacks you see in the playoffs with 6-man coverages. I don't know if there's a way to confuse Matt Stafford with 6-man coverages. You can pre-snap disguise it all you want. All he does is say, okay, I just won't pay attention to what's pre-snap. I'll read it post-snap, and I've been in the league for 600 years, so I know how to do that. And guess what? Jared Goff's the same way. You're going to see him twice a year. So if you throw a bunch more 6-man coverages at him, he's going to dice you. And because the Vikings rushing 4 doesn't have, they don't have interesting 7-man coverages that can confuse Jared Goff. All they can do is pre-snap disguise. But you go 1,000, 2,000 into any Vikings play, they will be in a coverage you see in high school. They will be in cover 2, cover 3, quarters, maybe a Palms variant, maybe like a Tampa 2 variant, maybe 2-man, some kind of man coverage. It's like it. You got a playbook that you can count on your fingertips, coverage-wise. Maybe little adjustments here and there on the inside. But what you see on the back end from other teams is more dynamic post-snap than what the Vikings do. Everything the Vikings do is pre-snap. That's why they sucked against Hurry Up, because Hurry Up takes the pre-snap process away, and that's where the Vikings generated most of their advantage. I don't know where you go from there. And I have a long-term concern about this team, about Kevin O'Connell's Vikings continuing to be regular season warriors that are great when they're playing not just the Titans and Jags and the bad teams that you play, but also the Falcons and Seahawks type teams that are, above average. You're great against those. But when you hit the elite of the elite, the kind of teams you got to take down if you're going to win the Super Bowl, they can read you like a book. You have to have something else. And they never had anything else. We watched 18 games of the Vikings doing the exact same thing over and over. And yeah, they won 14 of them. So it's like it was justifiable to say, okay, let's run that back again. But I think they failed to look inward and say, we have a problem here. If that wasn't Mac Jones on the other side of the field, that could have been dicey. Maybe we should figure something else out. No, they brought the same game plan they always brought into into Los Angeles. Los Angeles did not. They didn't play the conservative style, and their defense just kicked enough ass that they eventually didn't have to blitz anymore. And they did a lot more dynamic disguising, and they killed you. And honestly, feels a lot like the Giants game from a couple years ago, and from the Lions game from last week. So all of this said, it's over now, right? So two main questions we're going to start talking about here are about Brian Flores and Sam Darnold. Are those two guys sticking in Minnesota? Plus other stuff that happens. Where are we going from here? So let's put a moratorium on it. I don't really feel like breaking this thing down in heavy detail. And it's over. There's no more chances to go back and fix it. So playing pretend like we're going to doesn't really feel useful. So instead, let's move on to what's going to happen next for the Vikings and try to take stock. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. This episode is brought to you by Gametime, and I have a great story for you about Gametime. So when the tickets to this game, when this game was first moved to Arizona, there was a 2-hour window for exclusive early access to tickets for Ram season ticket holders and then people who had tickets to the original game. And in that window, a ton of those tickets got bought by Ram season ticket holders and then put back on the resale market. Now the resale market didn't have the same exclusivity, and that's what Gametime was there to help you navigate. So all over all kinds of ticket people, Gametime trolled that market and found some absolutely, utterly insane deals. I can show you Twitter DMs and just Twitter replies, like people saying, I got this seat for $160 and they're on the field. Like they're row 4 for less than $200 for 2 tickets. That's the power of Gametime. That when plans change, when there's an opportunity, they will find you the deal. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and you can use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Let's look ahead here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. There is a reason, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a reason that I'm wearing the jersey that I'm wearing. It's a JJ McCarthy jersey. And I wore this, you could go back to the game recaps. I wore this jersey for the whiteout game because it's a whiteout style jersey and I felt that was appropriate. And otherwise, I wore this jersey a lot when I felt like it was Sam Darnold wasn't going to stay. Like after moments where I felt like Sam Darnold had hurt his stock, I wore the JJ McCarthy jersey because that was the feeling I was feeling. But for all of the wishy-washy and rumor and stuff we had, the Sam Darnold situation feels a lot different than it did 14 days ago. It's how the NFL works. Things change fast. But if you asked me right after that Packers game, and people did on the mailbag, you can go listen to me talk about it, I was like, man, I think they're going to franchise tag this guy. I don't think they can offer him the kind of contract he'll say yes to, but I think they might force the issue and franchise just to keep him for another year because it's going so well. But after laying a total egg against Detroit, terrible game, and coming out and having another one, now that creates a narrative. There's an off day. If you go out, if the Vikings lost, but Sam Darnold still looked okay, I think this is so different. But he didn't. He held the ball forever. He took terrible sacks. One thing Darnold has done all year, I haven't talked about it enough, but it drives me nuts, is when pressure comes, he runs backwards, and he makes that sack worse. What could have been an 8-yard sack turns into a 14-yard sack. You would much prefer him to do the Kirk Cousins crumple into it thing. If it's going to happen, take it. It's going to happen, but don't make it worse. Or he tries to, make too much happen, and then he fumbles and it gets returned for a touchdown, which was the backbreaker of this game. That turned it. The Vikings were driving down to tie it up at 10-10, and then suddenly it was 17-3. That broke the Vikings' backs, and they totally ran out of emotional energy. And so I think that there's a culture question for Kevin O'Connell as well. I don't want this to spiral, by the way, into like a fire Kevin O'Connell take. That's not where I am, and I don't think that's where you should be either. Like that would be a lot. But it gives me a long-term concern for the Vikings, and I think if I were to identify the thing that they should address the most in the offseason, that's the thing. It's that. But for Darnold, this game was bad, and I don't anticipate looking at the tape is going to like make it look better. I'll be open to that, maybe. But I'm not thinking it's going to do that. And so that means that when the pressure ratcheted up for that Detroit game, he choked. And then the pressure ratcheted up again for a playoff game, and he choked. So if I'm the Vikings, and the goal is to win the Super Bowl, not have good regular seasons, right? Win the Super Bowl. And you're looking at a guy that's choking under pressure in the playoffs. How do you deal with that? There's two sides to this argument, and we will get into it in lots and lots of detail over the coming weeks. But the two sides are going to be, one is, well, he's a playoff choker. We don't want that. Our goal is to win the Super Bowl. Let somebody else have a good regular season with him. Okay. Or, well, that was his first time in the playoffs. Now he'll learn from it. He'll grow. What do you think? And I can't answer that without having a conversation with the guy, I think. And that's what the Vikings will do, and I won't have that luxury. So we'll just kind of have to sit and wait and see. But I think we would all be lying if we said this didn't make for a much harder contract negotiation for Sam Darnold. But this decision does not get made on January 13th or January 14th. Okay, this decision gets made in February when we've got a month of distance from all of this. When we go, yeah, that's how it ended, but most of the year, 90% of the year was fantastic. Yeah, the last two were bad, but so much of it was good that you're going to approach it a little more holistically. When we think of, the year that they had, it's going to be, yeah, very good, but, which has been Darnold all year. Good, but. And so what do you offer that as a contract? And crucially, here's how this is going to play out behind the scenes. Darnold's agent is going to probably have an understanding of what the Vikings are offering Darnold or intend to offer Darnold. Okay, we take that, right? Now he's going to go at various places. He's going to go talk to GMs and owners and people and say, what would you offer Sam Darnold? He's going to do this before free agency. Okay, maybe not allowed to, but it's going to happen. Deal with it. At the combine or whatever. A couple months removed, after some crazy thing happens in the divisional game and we've got a Super Bowl narrative that all went crazy and the AFC Championship was insane. After all of that stuff is totally washed away, this wild card loss that will get mostly forgotten and just kind of be another one on his resume. You're going to look at these gaudy stats. You're going to look at this whole thing. And then you're going to ask, the GM of the Titans or whoever, what would you pay for this guy? And you'll get a number. And if those numbers are even close to the Vikings number, they're going to say, thanks, Vikings, but no thanks. We're going to have all these teams bid on us and see if we can get any of these deals to come up. And that's going to be okay. If they all say, yeah, but we don't really like what you did in the playoffs, we're probably good. We'll draft Cam Ward. We're good. Then he goes back to the Vikings and he says, we'll take it. And you get some kind of mini extension. That's how this is going to play out. This decision will probably be more pretty much made before free agency opens with regard to Darnold and the Vikings. And the Vikings will then maybe enter that bidding war if he hits free agency, but then there's no guarantee that they can win it. The other major possible departure is Brian Flores. He has been requested for interviews with the Bears, the Jets, and the Jaguars. We'll see if the Cowboys also get in on this. They fired Mike McCarthy the day of this game, so they're still working on it. So that's 3 and a potentially 4th team that can take Brian Flores. If Brian Flores does sign or as a head coach with one of those teams, the Vikings will get 2 compensatory third-round picks, one in each consecutive year, and that'll be like added to their thing. They'll get those. Congratulations, Brian Flores. And then that'll be that. What happens in the defensive coordinator position after that becomes an interesting talker. You could promote Durante Jones. You could hire somebody else off a Belichick tree like Gerard Mayo. There's all kinds of interesting ideas. But we'll cross that bridge if and when we come to it. For now, we're watching the head coaching searches of the Jets, Bears, and Jaguars, and then possibly the Cowboys, depending on what their list looks like, and see how this goes. There's no world. I know some people coming off this game are like, what if we fired Brian Flores? There's no world. There's no world at all. They're way too happy with him over the course of the year, and they're not going to make that decision based on the playoff game. They're going to make that decision based holistically on the entire season, because the regular season does matter for informing those kinds of decisions. To loop this thing all the way back around. All right. If this is the last time that some of you hear from me, because a lot of you only listen in the season, and hey, that's great. I love you anyways. I will see you next season. But if you are a real everydayer, you'll be back and we'll start talking about free agency, cap stuff, contract things. There's all kinds of stuff to talk about. And because the Vikings were good deep into the year, we're behind on all of it. So we're going to have a jam-packed couple of months here on Locked On Vikings. I hope you're there with me for it. I will see you all tomorrow. Maybe we'll do a later in the week mailbag or something like that, like vent line kind of move, whatever it is. I will see you for it. Love you. And as always, Skull.